All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell. Now you can dial in to listen to the X Zone radio show from anywhere in the world with Rob McConnell 24/7, 365 by dialing 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. If you have a mobile phone or landline, the X Zone radio show with Rob McConnell is now at your beck and call at 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080, 24/7, 365. Welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free 800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, one simple address, X Zone Radio TV, and our website, xzoneradiotv.com. My guest this hour is a gentleman I've had the pleasure of speaking to a number of times over the years. His name is Ralf Ellis, and he has 12 books that are available on his website at edfu-books.com. And I've got to tell you something about Ralf. We agree on so many things. It's uncanny because, you know, I'm the kind of guy that I like to think I'm a straight shooter. And I know for a fact that Ralf Ellis is a straight shooter because the books and topics that he writes about and that we talk about here on the X Zone are the truth. Alternative history, as I've been told that we talk about, I call it what the scholars don't want you to know, because people in academia, they are very egotistical. You know, even when they're wrong, they're right. For example, we know for a fact that Christopher Columbus didn't discover the Americas, and yet kids are still taught today that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. We're going to be talking to Ralf about his books. Jesus, King of Edessa is one of them. Cleopatra to Christ. Mary Magdalene, Princess of Orange. Skoda, Egyptian Queen of the Scots, Eden in Egypt, Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, Tempest and Exodus, Solomon, Falcon and Sheba, Thoth, Architect of the Universe, K2, Quest of the Gods. And Ralf, first of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I understand that you're in the Philippines right now, sitting on a beach. Well, we're here in Hamilton.
Yes, indeed. Good morning to you. Well, it's good morning from me anyway in the Philippines. So, yes, we're not under a foot of snow here. We're out on a beach in a tropical island in the middle of the Philippines somewhere. So you will hear some kids playing on the sand and various things like that.
Well, that's great. And Ralf, as always, great having you with us. You and I chatted briefly before we went to air, and you're still getting into the discussions with academia about the wonderful topics that you discuss in your books.
Yes, I've had numerous discussions, and not very many of them have been amicable, I must admit. I've been disappointed. I had one particular review of my book which made things up. It was a complete fabrication. So he fabricated various things that I was supposed to have said,
right,
and then said it's completely wrong. Well, yes, because you fabricated it. So I sort of very politely made a correction to his incorrect review. And, of course, I was deleted from his website, and all of my comments were deleted. And so the guy is now hiding behind a web fortress at present, shouting and screaming, but has not changed his review whatsoever. So it's rather disappointing. You've got an academic review of a book,
right,
which is a total fabrication. And it's still up there on the websites, and he will not change it. He will not allow any discussion upon it. And this is not really the academia we envisage when we pay our taxes for all these education budgets. We expect something more independent than that.
You expect the truth.
Yes, indeed.
Ralph,
this is a blatant fabrication. He said that I conflated 4 kings from the kingdom of Edessa, and I don't even mention these kings in the entire book. So I'm not quite sure what planet that particular academic was on, but there we go.
All right. Well, you and I will talk more about your wonderful books when we come back from this 2-minute commercial break. Exo Nation, Ralph Ellis is our very special guest. www.edfu-books.com. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. We're in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, where we had over 2.5 feet of snow drop on us yesterday, and my good friend Ralph Ellis is sitting on a beach in the Philippines where it's 29 degrees Celsius. Oh, well. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Don't go away. No, I'm not going to shovel any snow. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Named one of the world's greatest psychics, Elizabeth Joyce is now giving readings worldwide via Skype. Elizabeth Joyce is recognized for her clairvoyant ability to help find missing persons, her analysis of dreams, past life regression work, mediumship, and her accurate predictions. Elizabeth has been a frequent guest on the X Zone radio show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, now for several years. For an appointment with Elizabeth Joyce, call 201-934-8986 or Skype at elizabeth.joyce. And for more information, you can always visit Elizabeth Joyce online at www.new-visions.com. Exonation, Ralph Ellis is with us. His website is www.edfu-books.com. The history that they don't want you to know and how the scientific community, archaeologists and theologians have been feeding you misinformation is what we're going to be talking about this hour with Ralph Ellis. For example, Adam and Eve were Pharaoh Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Is this possible? Well, it would seem that the Israelites were not just in Egypt. They were Egyptians themselves. Now, this is not factual material. It is well researched and backed up by, well, amounts of historical data. If anything, people say that there is too much data, you just can't make revolutionary claims without copious evidence. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting piece of research, that was, because, of course, researching the Genesis story, we don't have very much information. It's all very fantastical,
Sure.
And I didn't really think that I would be able to find very much there. But the first clue, of course, is that the river that flowed out of Eden went through a Garden of Eden,
Right.
and then split into 4 branches.
Well, that sounds
And there
like
is really only one river in that region that does that, and that, of course, is the Nile.
That's right.
And, of course, that it splits, at Cairo, it splits into the 4 branches of the Nile Delta. And that sort of made sense because this is where these people came from. This is what the initial book of the Exodus and so on is all about. It's about the Israelites being in Egypt, not in Mesopotamia, but in Egypt. And so I was looking for a Garden of Eden within Egypt. And of course, the obvious Garden of Eden, especially bearing in mind the spelling within the Aramaic Hebrew, is the Garden of Arten. Eden, Arten, is pretty much spelt exactly the same, both in the Egyptian and in the Aramaic. And the Garden of Arten, of course, was the garden that was built by Pharaoh Akhenaten in his new city in Middle Egypt. And so if the Garden of Arten was the Garden of Eden, then surely the 2 famous characters within the Garden of Eden were actually the king and queen themselves.
And that makes a lot of sense because King Akhenaten was the first pharaoh to believe that there was one God, the Ra.
Yes,
and
he
that
was.
ties in perfectly with the story of Genesis.
Yes, well, he was the first monotheist, and of course, within Judaism, the single God of the Israelites has multiple names, of course, and obviously we know Elohim and we know Yahweh, but one of the common names that this God has is Adon. And of course, the God of Akhenaten was called Aten.
That's right.
Aten, Adon, it's obviously the same God. And so you have these 2 lovebirds in the Garden of Eden, or the Garden of Aten, who were naked for some reason within this garden. And of course, if we look into Egyptian literature and Egyptian iconography, the king and queen, Akhenaten and Nefertiti, are always shown within Amarna, their new city, as being naked. So it's perfectly correct. Adam and Eve, that is Akhenaten and Nefertiti, were always naked within the Garden of Arten, the Garden of Eden. And so the whole story makes perfect sense. And in fact, there's a slight modification to that story because Nefertiti and Eve doesn't really sound like the same name. And what has happened is probably it is a reference to Akhenaten's favorite wife, who was called Kia. And of course, within the Old Testament, Eve was not called Eve, of course. She was called Hava. Hava, Kia,
Right.
or Kaya. It's virtually the same name, the way it is spelt in the Egyptian. So it's actually likely to be a story about Akhenaten and his favorite wife, which was Kia.
How many children did Nefertiti and King Akhenaten have?
6. And there again we have a connection with the Old Testament text because Akhenaten gets 2 starring roles within the Old Testament text. He was the hero of the Genesis story, but he was also a part of the Exodus story because his brother was called Moses, of course. And it plainly says within the Exodus story that all of the male children of the Israelites were killed by the midwives. And that's pretty much what we have with Akhenaten and Nefertiti, of course, because he never had any male children. He had 6 daughters. So again, the Old Testament texts appear to be pretty much correct as far as we know this history.
Why do you think the vast differences between the book of Genesis in the Bible, the creation story, and here you've got the what I consider to be the research done with King Akhenaten and Nefertiti in the Garden of Eden? It makes perfect sense to me. Why the big lie? Why the big story? Why the sensationalism?
There has been a complete separation of the Israelites from Egypt. For some reason, for many reasons, I suppose, they were no longer happy to admit that they were Egyptians, and especially powerful Egyptians, kings of Egypt, pharaohs. It was much easier to sell a sob story about persecution, and they were the persecuted ones, rather than selling a story of you were actually the most powerful people in the world, and you still lost your position, and you were kicked out on a great exodus. That is a much more difficult story to sell to the people than you were just persecuted by the Pharaoh of Egypt. Yeah. And some of this persecution is persecution by their own king. So we have this great story of Pharaoh persecuting the Israelites, making bricks for the Pharaoh. It is likely, because we have an equivalent story by the Egyptian historian Manetho of the lepers and maimed priests being exiled to the east bank of the Nile, to the stone quarries on the east bank of the Nile. Now, if you read between the lines, that is obviously a description of the founding of Amarna, which was the capital city of Akhenaten. So we have this story about Akhenaten being mocked, really, because he's having to go to the stone quarries. They mocked Amarna as being the stone quarry because there was nothing there. Everything had to be created. It was just a bare plain, and everything had to be created. So the whole place was resonating with people chipping rocks out to make temples, buildings, houses, making mud bricks, of course. And so the whole enterprise of Amarna was making mud bricks for the Pharaoh. And obviously Pharaoh was getting upset and saying, you are idle, you will make bricks whether you've got straw or whether you haven't got straw. You will make the same number of bricks. What they're not telling you is that is Akhenaten himself goading his own people onto ever greater projects, because he wanted his new city to build in a huge rush, of course.
Right.
And so, Pharaoh was angry, but it was their own Pharaoh. So you can see how the story has been, it's the same story, but it's been slightly distorted and it sounds completely different, but really nothing has been changed. It's only our perception that has changed. We think it's some angry Pharaoh down in Thebes. It wasn't. It was their own leader that was goading them on to ever greater feats of construction.
Question for you, Ralf. The pyramids. They're surrounded in mystery. They're surrounded in controversy. I've had people on the show who say that the pyramids were magnificent tombs for the pharaohs. Other people say that the pyramids are actually beacons for extraterrestrials who built them. You've been there. What in your experience and the research that you've done? Number one, who built the pyramids? Number two, what were or what are their purpose?
Well, I can't definitively say who built them, but I can say who did not build them.
Okay.
And they were not built by the pharaohs, of course, because they were not tombs. We know they're not tombs because there are no inscriptions inside them. No pharaoh in his right mind would ever be buried in a tomb that did not have his name inscribed all over it and the images of the gods that were going to assist him into the afterlife. It would be utterly unthinkable. So we know they are not tombs. And also they are built as one grand project. So this is not three separate pyramids on the Giza plateau. It's one big building project, all interconnected. And they do represent the belt of Orion, as has been said before. And the most important bit in some respects are the causeways, which go out to various quadrants of the dawn sky. And they denote certain parts of the season.
So are they observatories?
Oh, yes, it's a stellar observatory. The causeways give you precise months of the year, and very precisely indeed. They will also give you a good indicator to the movement of precession, which
Right.
is, the movement of the heavens above once every 26,000 years. And also, the top of the Great Pyramid was always a platform. So it's not been chopped off in recent decades. It's quite clear that the top of the Great Pyramid was always a platform. And it was therefore the greatest observatory in the whole of the ancient world. You can imagine the view you get from the top of the Great Pyramid, above all the smoke of the fires in the local cities and so on. And you would see Ra rise about 10 minutes before anyone else on the ground did. And so there would have been a set of steps that went to the top. They've all been lost now, of course, because all of the casing stones were pillaged during the Muslim era, of course.
Ralf,
but
I hate to
there would have been.
Whoops. Ralf, I hate to do this, but you and I have to take our commercial break. Please stand by.
Okay, we'll come back later.
Ralf Ellis is my special guest, www.edfu-books.com. They're great books, and I guarantee you'll be amazed at what you read. Truth is stranger than fiction. We'll be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away. A witch doctor's power and his ancient tribal ways cruelly collide with the force and authority of modern Africa. Africa is viewed through myriad eyes. You will never forget these characters. A young girl forced to endure a painful, cruel, and antiquated tribal custom. The sole survivor of a vicious tribal massacre. A nun who endures physical assault that compels her to question her faith. A deprived, disadvantaged schoolgirl who is infected with HIV. The translucent soul of a murdered friend. Welcome to Africa's Unfinished Symphony. While the tale of South Africa in the wake of World War II is riveting, violent, and cruel, it is also brimming with stories of kindness, compassion, and courage. Africa's Unfinished Symphony highlights commanding characters who not only bring haunting racial clashes to life, but also convey the intense conflicts that existed between archaic customs and modern influences. You will be captivated as you follow the convoluted path of Farida, of the ancients battling to become Bertha of the modern world. But are the outcomes of her struggle the best results for her and her beloved Africa? Africa's Unfinished Symphony will immerse you in historic African themes that will jolt you out of complacency and into compassion. For more information on how you can get your very own copy of Africa's Unfinished Symphony, visit www.luciamann.com. That's www.luciamann.com. Explanation, Ralf Ellis is our special guest this hour, www.edfu-books.com. Great having you with us, Ralf. Has it started to rain yet on the beach? Ralf, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I had the mute on. So, yes,
okay.
I've just had to retire back under an umbrella.
Oh, pity. We were talking about the pyramids, and it makes sense to me that they were observatories because this was a very necessary part of life, knowing what season it is, because it affected the crops, it affected so much of the day-to-day life of the people back then. Why is there so much controversy about who built the pyramids? Why is this a big thing?
I'm not sure, really, because, I mean, it's a very simple thing to say it's a temple complex.
Sure.
If you look at cathedral in Britain, you wouldn't say, or anywhere in Europe, you wouldn't say the cathedral is a tomb to a king. Kings may well be buried in it,
Mm-hmm.
but a cathedral is not a tomb. And likewise, the pyramids of Giza are also not tombs. As I said, we know that because there are no inscriptions. We know that because they are definitely stellar observatories. They are also processional observatories, so we can observe the procession of the equinox, which I think was the main purpose of these monuments, rather than the annual calendar for planting crops and so on. I think the main thing they were looking at was the procession of the equinox, so they were counting off the millennia, the the thousands of years from one astrological constellation to the next, which was a very important part of their theology. And so they would have this set of steps that went up to the top so they could make these observations. And that was, of course, the stairway to heaven. That was how the stairway, from the Old Testament, the stairway to heaven was a description of the steps that went to the top of the Great Pyramid. And also the Great Pyramid was important within the Exodus story, because when Moses went up Mount Sinai, he wasn't going up Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. He was actually going up the side of the Great Pyramid. So Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid.
That's it? That's the entire story? So what was this? What was on top of the Great Pyramid that was purported to be God, and who received the Ten Commandments, if anyone at all?
Well, we know Moses went up to the top of the Great Pyramid because the Great Pyramid conforms to all of the descriptions of Mount Sinai. So it was the tallest. It was on the edge of a desert. It was the tallest mountain in the region. It was sharp and difficult to climb. It had a cavern inside it. You were able to go to the top of it, which you can. And it had what in the Old Testament is called a black pavement at the base, which looked like the night sky. Now, and it was so smooth, you had to take your sandals off before stepping upon it. Now, you're not to find that sort of artifact out in the Sinai Peninsula with a mountain stuck in Sinai. But if you go to the east side of the Great Pyramid, you will find the great black basalt pavement, which originally was a huge great square pavement at the foot of the Great Pyramid. So all of the descriptions of Mount Sinai conform to what we know we have at the base of the Great Pyramid. So yes, it was a very important place. And what was the god that they were looking at? Well, for many reasons, I think that they were actually looking for or venerating a sacred stone. So at the top of all the pyramids, you would have a pyramidion, which is a very small pyramid, only about a meter high, 2 cubits normally, which was pyramidal in shape. And that was a reconstruction, a copy of the Benben stone. And the Benben stone was upon a large pillar in Heliopolis, near Cairo. But and so the pyramids would have had these imitation Benben stones on the top of them. And the Benben stone was supposed to be meteoric. It was supposed to be iron. It was supposed to be magnetic. The Benben stone was the phoenix. The phoenix returned. A lot of these Benben stones had the phoenix actually drawn on them. So when the phoenix returned to its nest, that essentially was the Benben stone. And it was linked to the primeval mound of Egyptian creation myth. The mound, which was an egg, which broke open and formed or gave birth to the sun. And this history of the sacred stone goes all the way through ancient history, all the way through Judaism, all the way through Greek history, and ends up in Scotland. So it's a very long and enduring part of our history and mythology.
Well, which came first then? Let me just step back here, because the information that we just heard from you about Moses going to the top of the pyramid, because the pyramid was actually, Mount Sinai. Does this mean that the Bible, the book of Genesis, which people believe was written by Moses after given the information from God, is nothing but fiction? It's a fictitious account, and does that mean that Moses was a fictitious writer?
Not entirely fictitious, no, because the actual Genesis story itself is the hymn to the Artisan. So you've got to remember that the brother of Akhenaten was called Moses. So the two brothers are Akhenaten and Tuthmoses, and Aaron and Moses. They were the same two brothers.
Well, who was Cain and Abel then?
Sorry, who was?
Cain and Abel.
Well, that goes back even further. That's a bit more difficult to describe. But the Genesis story itself, the creation myth, is a distillation of the hymn to the Artisan. So Pharaoh Akhenaten himself made this hymn to the Artisan, and if you take all of the elements of that hymn, they are identical to the Genesis story. The only difference is the Genesis story is supposed to be a creation myth, whereas the hymn to the Artisan was actually talking about the dawning of a new day. So instead of being a creation of the whole of the world, it was just the dawning of one day. So when the birds saw the sun, coming across the horizon, they were stretching their limbs and so on, and coming back to life, because during the night everything was considered to be dead, and they were coming back to life during the dawning of the new day. So it's all pure Egyptian mythology, direct from the pen of Pharaoh Akhenaten.
Fascinating. Where does the Sphinx fall into the entire Egyptian equation?
I have to agree with others who have postulated what the Sphinx is all about, in that it's a depiction of Leo. So the greatest aspect of Egyptian theology was obviously the precession of the equinox and modern astrology. And the constellations move around the Earth every 2,140 years, roughly. And they change from constellation to constellation. And about 10,000... So I'm just having to move because of the thunderstorm. I'm getting wet.
Oh, gosh.
And I don't like my iPad getting wet. Let me just move back 1 meter.
Certainly. I'm just going to let the listeners know where they can find out more about you, Ralf. And that's at Ralph's website at www.edfu-books.com. And I must tell you, X-Zone Nation, just go to our archives and listen to the shows that we've done with Ralf in the past. They're fascinating. I love having this guy on the show. Whether he's in the United Kingdom or whether he's in the Philippines, he's always a welcome guest here on the X-Zone. So there's a lot of truth to what many believe is fiction, but the truth isn't exactly how people would like us to perceive it. So could we say then, Ralf, that the depiction of the Israelites being the underdog was just the squeaky wheel getting the oil?
Yeah, it's funny, actually. I sort of, in a way, started this series with a view to disproving a lot of what was said, especially within the book of Exodus. Book of Genesis. But actually, it's confirmed that most of what it says is actually true, historically. It's just that it's not true in the sense that it is actually taught. So we have these, minor differences that Adam and Eve happen to be Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and the Exodus story is partly the Exodus of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and the Genesis story is the hymn to the Aten. But really, the story stays very much the same. It's just been distorted slightly, so we've taken out all of the Egyptian aspects of the story and labeled them as being purely Israelite. And as you say, just poor people who are being manipulated by forces outside their control. Mm-hmm. When it was nothing of the sort, of course. Akhenaten was not a poor, powerless person with no control over his destiny. He was the most powerful person pretty much in that era. And his main foes, of course, were the priesthood down in Thebes, who were virtually creating a civil war between him and the rest of Egypt. And he lost. And so his brave new world that he started at Amarna, his brave new city, with his single god, the Aten, or as the Israelites would call it, the Adon, was eventually pushed out of Amarna. And of course, we don't know where they went to. Everyone says that, Akhenaten died at Amarna, but there is absolutely no evidence of that, no evidence whatsoever. His tomb was never used. He's most certainly not KV 55, which was brought up recently by Zahi Hawass. I don't know if you saw that. But they did some genetic research on the mummy from KV 55, which is one of the tombs down in the Valley of the Kings. And they said, this is Akhenaten. But plainly it's not, because this mummy has always been identified as being a person of about 25 years of age, which cannot be Akhenaten, of course.
Yeah.
And they did not attempt to even challenge that previous view of the age of this particular mummy. And of course, if you're dealing with mummies, an entire family that was inbred, because they used to obviously marry their brothers, sisters, and daughters, and all of this sort of caper.
Right.
It's very difficult, obviously, to separate people through genetics, because they are so highly inbred.
Let me ask you this. If Adam and Eve are King Akhenaten and Nefertiti, Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid, was Jesus Christ from Galilee, and was he the Son of God?
Well, he was the Son of God in the same respect that most of the pharaohs were sons of God, of course. Every pharaoh was the son of one god or another.
So does this mean that Jesus was a pharaoh?
Oh, yes, he was of the pharaonic dynasty. He was a pharaoh, but in exile, of course, no longer in Egypt. And every pharaoh was the pharaoh of one god or another. So Tuthmoses was the son of Tuth or Jehuti, Thoth. Ahmoses was the son of the moon god, and Ramoses was the son of Ra. So they were all named as being the sons of God. I mean, that was not very unusual. But it didn't preclude you from having a normal birth, of course, and a normal mother. The Egyptians saw no problem in having this dual birth through the gods and through a normal human mother. So that was nothing particularly special. So yes, he was a pharaoh in exile. He was of the pharaonic line. He was actually descended from Queen Cleopatra and the Ptolemaic line of Egypt. And the Ptolemaic line of Egypt was exiled to Persia initially with Queen Theomusa Orania. And then she was kicked out of Persia. And she ended up in Syria, in AD 4.
Wow. Ralph, you and I got to take our final break, my friend. Please stand by. X-Zone Nation, this is what I was talking to you about before, about Ralph Ellis. The truth is stranger than fiction. www.edfu-books.com, and Ralph and I will be back on the other side of this short commercial break. Stand by. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes, finds a locket, or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com. If you enjoy reading a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love From Out of the Woodwork by William S. Peckham. Sean Kennedy, a Toronto contractor, buys derelict houses, guts them, and turns them into multifamily dwellings. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, a century house in ruins, and starts the renovation, the house fights back. He is visited by ghosts of owners past. His visions are triggered by touching an oak mantle, reading a faded letter, opening an old locket, or opening a brand new casket in the basement. These visions will take you on a trip across southern Ontario from Niagara Falls to Toronto to Kingston. From Out of the Woodwork is now available in paperback and on your favorite electronic reader. To order your copy of From Out of the Woodwork, go to www.williamspeckham.com. That's www.williamspeckham.com.
It's a revolution! Get down on your knees and show some appreciation.
You're darn right. Get on your knees, show some appreciation, X-Zone Nation, because this is the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's also the place where fact is more out of it than reality. This hour we've been talking to a good friend of the X-Zone, Ralf Ellis. His website is www.edfu-books.com. Ralph is going to be back with us in 2 weeks because we just can't cover a thimbleful of the great conversations that Ralph and I have whenever he's with us. First of all, Ralph, thanks very much for being with us and for sitting on a beach in the Philippines in the middle of a rainstorm doing this show.
Yeah, this is great, isn't it? I hope the rain doesn't come out too much on the audio.
No.
But yeah, it's a huge, great rainstorm and lightning flashing across the bay.
The story about Jesus, the Immaculate Conception, the angels, his crucifixion, does that fit into the realm of reality in your research?
Yes. Yeah, very much so, because we have a whole history of who this person is. If you dare to believe what people are told not to believe. So there is a person who matches in every detail the life of Jesus. And yes, he did have a miraculous birth. Well, according to the history, he did. He was born miraculously without a mother, etc. And he was crucified. He was crucified after the siege of Jerusalem in AD 70. And 3 of them were crucified together on crosses in the Kidron Valley. And a man called Josephus, could that be Josephus of Arimathea, came along and he saw them, and they were ex-compatriots of his, so he went to the Roman governor and asked for them to be taken down from the crosses. And they were taken down. 2 of them died, and 1 of them survived. Familiar story? Yes. But this is from real history. This is the real history as given to us by Josephus Flavius. And so, yes, I think this person really did exist. And the person who was being crucified at the time, of course, was called King Jesus. So was King Jesus King Jesus? Yes, of course he was. But you have to dare to think out of the box, because the history of King Jesus it's the same as King Jesus, but of course he's a very different person. He's a powerful king. He was involved in a war with the Romans. So yes, he was a rebel. Yes, he was arrested for being part of a revolution, as it says in the Gospels. Yes, he was crucified. And yes, he probably did survive, because one of the 3, and it doesn't say which one, of course, but one of the 3 did survive the crucifixion. So, yes, we have a story that's almost identical in every respect to the gospel story. But you just have to understand that this person was a real king and not an artisan.
And you have to actually think outside the box and be open to what you may not have been told, but you also have to listen with an open mind and be willing to accept what may actually be reality compared to the fiction that we've all been told.
Yes, but the story is identical.
Yeah.
But again, like we were talking about the Old Testament, it's just been distorted slightly. So you have this different perception of who these people were. But the story remains exactly the same. The only thing that changes in this new story is it's 30 years later. So it all happens in the AD 60s and not in the AD 30s.
Ralph, we've got to say so long for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining us, my good friend. You're going to be back with me in 2 weeks. We're going to make sure that we get all the information to you. Take care of yourself in the Philippines. Enjoy the beautiful warm weather. And I look forward to the next time you meet with us here in the X Zone in 2 weeks. X Zone Nation,
Marvelous.
For more information on Ralf Ellis, visit his website at www.edfu-books.com. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour. Don't go away.